In the heart of the American frontier, where honor meant everything and a single act of courage could change the course of history, one cowboy, split-second decision to save a dying native child would lead to an extraordinary encounter that would test every belief he held about friendship, loyalty, and the true meaning of bravery. What happened at dawn would forever change both worlds. The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty trail as Jake Morrison guided his weathered horse through the canyon. A seasoned cowboy with 20 years of frontier life etched into his weathered face, Jake had seen his share of hardship, but nothing had prepared him for what he would discover that fateful afternoon. The silence of the desert was broken only by the rhythmic clop of his horse's hooves and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. As Jake rounded a bend in the rocky path, a faint sound caught his attention, a child's weak cry echoing off the canyon walls. His instincts, sharpened by years of survival in hostile territory, told him to be cautious. Relations between settlers and the Apache tribes had been tense for months, with both sides nursing grievances and mistrust. Yet something in that desperate cry spoke directly to his heart, transcending all boundaries of race and conflict. Following the sound, Jake discovered a small native boy, no more than 8 years old, trapped beneath a fallen boulder near a dried riverbed. The child's leg was pinned, and blood seeped from a gash on his forehead. His dark eyes, filled with pain and fear, met Jake's blue ones with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. The boy's traditional Apache clothing marked him as one of the enemy, according to the unspoken laws of the frontier. But Jake saw only a child in mortal danger. Without hesitation, Jake dismounted and approached the trapped boy. Using his rope and the leverage of a sturdy branch, he worked for over an hour in the blazing heat to free the child. The boy's breathing was shallow, and Jake could see that time was running out. With strength born of determination, he finally managed to shift the boulder enough to pull the child free. The boy was unconscious by then, his small body limp in Jake's arms. Jake faced a crucial decision. The nearest town was 2 days' ride away, but he remembered seeing smoke from an Apache camp just beyond the ridge earlier that morning. Taking the child to his own people would be faster, but it would also mean riding directly into what could be a deadly confrontation. Yet as he looked down at the unconscious boy, whose breathing grew more labored with each passing moment, Jake knew there was really no choice at all. He mounted his horse with the child cradled in his arms and turned toward the Apache camp, knowing he might be riding toward his own death, but unable to do anything else. The Apache camp came into view as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. Jake's heart pounded as he approached the circle of traditional dwellings, knowing that every step forward could be his last. Warriors emerged from their shelters, hands moving instinctively to their weapons as they spotted the approaching rider. The tension was palpable. A white cowboy carrying an Apache child into their sacred space was either an act of incredible courage or foolish suicide. An elderly woman, her face deeply lined with wisdom and years, stepped forward from the group. Her eyes immediately fell on the unconscious child in Jake's arms, and she let out a cry that seemed to pierce the very soul. Jake realized with a start that this must be the boy's grandmother. Without waiting for permission or fearing the consequences, he dismounted and gently placed the child on the ground before her. The woman's weathered hands flew over the boy's still form, checking his pulse, his breathing, the extent of his injuries. She spoke rapidly in Apache to the warriors surrounding them, her voice filled with urgency and emotion. Jake couldn't understand the words, but he didn't need to. The universal language of a grandmother's love transcended all barriers. She looked up at Jake with eyes that held a mixture of gratitude and suspicion, clearly torn between thankfulness for his actions and wariness of his intentions. Chief Running Bear, an imposing figure with silver threading through his long black hair, pushed through the crowd. His presence commanded immediate respect, and the other warriors stepped back to give him space. His dark eyes studied Jake intently, taking in every detail: the cowboy's worn clothes, his respectful posture, the genuine concern evident in his expression. The chief knelt beside the injured child, placing a gentle hand on the boy's forehead while speaking softly in his native tongue. As the tribe's medicine woman began treating the boy's injuries with traditional herbs and techniques, Jake found himself surrounded by Apache warriors, their faces unreadable masks of controlled emotion. He could feel their eyes boring into him, assessing his every movement, judging his intentions. Some hands still rested on weapon handles, ready to strike if this proved to be some sort of trap or deception. The air was thick with unspoken questions and barely contained tension. Chief Running Bear rose and approached Jake, stopping just arm's length away. When he spoke, his English was clear and measured, each word carefully chosen. "Why does the white cowboy bring our child to us? What does he seek in return for this act?" Jake met the chief's gaze steadily, knowing that his answer would determine not only his own fate, but possibly the future relationship between their peoples. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Jake straightened his shoulders and looked Chief Running Bear directly in the eyes, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "I seek nothing, Chief. I found your boy trapped and dying. Any man with a heart would have done the same." His words rang with simple honesty, but Jake could see the skepticism in several warriors' faces. Trust between their peoples had been shattered too many times for his words alone to carry weight. The medicine woman's urgent voice interrupted the tense standoff. She called to the chief in Apache, her tone conveying desperate news. Chief Running Bear's expression darkened as he listened to her report. The boy was worse than they had initially thought, internal injuries that their traditional medicine could not heal. Without the white man's doctor and medicine, the child would not survive the night. This revelation changed everything. The nearest white settlement with a proper doctor was a full day's hard ride through dangerous terrain. Even if they could make the journey, there was no guarantee that the white doctor would treat an Apache child, and bringing the boy into town could spark violence from settlers who viewed all natives as enemies. The chief's weathered face showed the weight of an impossible decision: let the child die, or risk everything on the slim hope of finding help among their enemies. Jake stepped forward, his voice cutting through the hushed conversations around them. "I know Doc Patterson in Cedar Ridge. He's a good man who took an oath to heal all people. If you'll trust me, I'll take the boy there myself." The offer hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Several warriors immediately voiced their objections in rapid Apache, their gestures making their feelings clear even to Jake's untrained eye. Chief Running Bear raised his hand for silence, his mind clearly wrestling with the decision. To trust his grandson's life to a white stranger went against everything his experience had taught him. Yet as he looked down at the pale, unconscious child, he realized that conventional wisdom might cost him the life of someone more precious than his own. The boy's name was Little Wolf, named for his fierce spirit and quick mind qualities that were now fading with each labored breath. "If Little Wolf dies in your white town," the chief said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you will die with him. If he lives, you will have earned something no white man has possessed in many years: the trust and friendship of the Apache nation." Jake nodded solemnly, understanding that he was accepting a burden that could cost him everything. As the medicine woman carefully prepared Little Wolf for the journey, wrapping him in soft furs and sacred items for protection, Jake prepared for what might be his final ride. The moonlit journey to Cedar Ridge became a race against time and death itself. Jake cradled Little Wolf against his chest, feeling the child's breathing grow more shallow with each passing mile. Behind them, invisible in the darkness, but undoubtedly present, Apache warriors followed at a distance, whether to protect or to exact vengeance. Jake couldn't be sure. The weight of the child in his arms and the responsibility on his shoulders pressed down heavier than any burden he had ever carried. As dawn approached, Jake's horse began to stumble with exhaustion, but the lights of Cedar Ridge finally appeared on the horizon. The small frontier town was just beginning to stir to life as Jake galloped down the main street, his urgent calls echoing off the wooden buildings. "Doc Patterson, emergency, Doc Patterson." His voice cracked with desperation and the strain of the long night's ride. Dr. Edmund Patterson emerged from his modest clinic, a thin man in his 50s whose gentle eyes had seen too much suffering in his years on the frontier. His expression immediately shifted from mild annoyance at being awakened to professional concern as he saw the unconscious child in Jake's arms. "Bring him inside, quickly," the doctor ordered, not hesitating despite the boy's obvious Apache heritage. True to Jake's faith in him, Doc Patterson saw only a patient in need. As the doctor began his examination, Jake explained the situation in hurried, breathless words. Doc Patterson's trained hands moved efficiently over the child's small body, his face growing more grave with each discovery. "Internal bleeding, possible concussion, and severe dehydration," he murmured, more to himself than to Jake. "It's going to be touch and go. We need to operate immediately." Outside, the town was beginning to wake up, and word of the Apache child's presence spread quickly. Jake could hear the angry murmur of voices gathering in the street, and he knew trouble was brewing. Many of the townspeople had lost friends or family to Apache raids, and the sight of one of their traditional enemies receiving care in their town would not sit well with everyone. Some voices called for the child to be turned away, while others demanded to know why Jake had brought the enemy among them. As Doc Patterson prepared for surgery, Jake positioned himself by the window, watching the growing crowd outside. Among the faces, he recognized several hot-headed young men who had been itching for a fight with any Native American. Their leader, Tom Bradley, had lost his brother in a recent raid and had sworn vengeance against all Apaches. Jake knew that his own reputation in town might not be enough to protect the child from the anger and prejudice building outside. The situation was becoming a powder keg that could explode at any moment, potentially costing not only Lil Wolf's life, but sparking a conflict that would engulf the entire territory. The surgery stretched through the morning hours, with Doc Patterson working tirelessly to save Little Wolf's life while Jake maintained his vigil by the window. The crowd outside had grown larger and more agitated, with Tom Bradley's voice rising above the others as he whipped them into a frenzy of anti-Apache sentiment. "Why should we help them when they've killed our people?" he shouted. "This could be a trap. Send the little savage back where he belongs." Jake's jaw tightened as he listened to the hateful words, but he forced himself to remain calm. Starting a fight now would only endanger Little Wolf further and prove the crowd's suspicions about his motives. Instead, he stepped outside to address the angry townspeople directly, his weathered hands held peacefully at his sides. "This is just a child," he said, his voice carrying across the square. "A dying child who never hurt anyone. What kind of people would we be if we turned our backs on someone so helpless?" Tom Bradley pushed to the front of the crowd, his face flushed with anger and old grief. "The same kind of people they are when they raid our settlements and kill our families. My brother's blood cries out for justice, not mercy." His words struck a chord with several others who had suffered losses, and Jake could feel the mood of the crowd shifting toward violence. Hands moved to gun belts, and the tension became almost unbearable. At that critical moment, a commotion erupted at the far end of town. 200 Apache warriors, painted for war and mounted on their finest horses, appeared like ghosts materializing from the desert itself. They moved with the deadly precision of a military unit, forming a perfect line that stretched across the entire width of the main street. At their head rode Chief Running Bear, his presence commanding and terrible in its quiet authority. The townspeople fell silent, their earlier bravado evaporating in the face of such an overwhelming show of force. Women grabbed their children and hurried indoors, while men reached for weapons they knew would be useless against such numbers. Jake felt his heart sink as he realized that his worst fears were coming true. The delicate situation was spiraling toward a massacre that would devastate both communities. Chief Running Bear guided his horse forward until he was directly in front of the clinic, his dark eyes finding Jake's through the crowd. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly in the morning air, each word pronounced with ceremonial gravity. "We have come for our child and for the man who saved him. If little Wolf lives, Jake Morrison will be welcomed as a brother among the Apache people. If little Wolf dies... double quotes. He left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was crystal clear to everyone present. The fate of both Jake and possibly the entire town now hung on the skill of one frontier doctor and the fragile thread of a child's life. The tension in Cedar Ridge reached its breaking point as the two sides faced each other in the dusty street, weapons drawn and nerves stretched to the snapping point. Children peered fearfully from behind curtains while their mothers whispered prayers, and even the bravest men felt the cold touch of fear as they contemplated the overwhelming odds arrayed against them. The only sound was the gentle morning breeze and the distant sound of Doc Patterson working frantically inside his clinic. Then, cutting through the silence like a bell, came the sound everyone had been waiting for, the thin but unmistakable cry of a child awakening. Little Wolf's voice, weak but alive, drifted from the clinic window, and Jake felt tears of relief sting his eyes. Doc Patterson appeared in the doorway moments later, his surgical apron stained but his face bearing the satisfied expression of a man who had just won a battle against death itself. "The boy will live," the doctor announced, his words carrying across the square like a benediction. "He's weak, but he's going to be fine." Chief Running Bear's stoic expression cracked for just a moment, revealing the profound relief and gratitude of a grandfather who had nearly lost his grandson. He dismounted and walked slowly toward the clinic, his warriors remaining motionless behind him. Inside the small clinic, little Wolf lay pale but conscious on the examination table, his dark eyes wide with confusion and pain. When he saw his grandfather's familiar face, he whispered something in Apache that brought tears to the old chief's eyes. Chief Running Bear placed a gentle hand on his grandson's forehead, murmuring words of love and comfort in their ancestral tongue. Turning to Jake, Chief Running Bear extended his hand in a gesture that transcended cultural boundaries. "You have saved the life most precious to me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "From this day forward, you are welcome in any Apache camp, and any Apache warrior will call you brother. Your courage and compassion have built a bridge between our peoples that I pray will stand for generations to come." As the Apache warriors began their peaceful withdrawal from Cedar Ridge, many of the townspeople stood in amazement at what they had witnessed. Tom Bradley, his anger replaced by confusion and perhaps the beginning of understanding, watched as Jake helped carry little Wolf to his grandfather's horse. The cowboy who had risked everything for a stranger's child had not only saved a life, but had opened a door to peace that had seemed forever closed. In the days that followed, the story of Jake Morrison and little Wolf would spread throughout the territory, becoming a legend that reminded people that sometimes the greatest courage lies not in fighting, but in the simple act of showing mercy to those who need it most. The bond forged that day between a cowboy and a native child would indeed stand as a bridge between worlds, proving that humanity transcends all boundaries when hearts are brave enough to cross them.